We export the vast majority, the bulk of our production. It's an important session. Always trade is an important session, but I guess it's even more important than normal at this time. Because we basically, we've basically got the WTO on life support, I think. It's been going since 2001, launched in 2001. I guess attitudes towards the WTO at the moment range from sort of mild and cautious optimism to downright pessimism, with probably the pessimists having the majority of the day. So it's important from that point of view. Of course, we've got WTO's, FTAs proliferating, and also on a more negative note, we've got technical barriers to trade, I think, greater than ever before. So hopefully we'll cover some of those topics in this session. We're fortunate to have two excellent speakers. Ted Haney is the first speaker. Ted is president of the Canadian Beef Export Federation. It's got 6 international offices, very interested in exporting, of course. Ted's managed the federation since, I think, 1992. So over to you, Ted.
Right on. Thank you very much. I'd like to not fall off the speaker's dais to begin. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and I really did enjoy preparing this presentation. And it's not often that we get to step out of pure marketing into our economist shoes, and for me it was very enjoyable. I gave a small version of this speech to our annual general meeting last week, and I said to our members and our board of directors, I really enjoyed writing this, and you're really going to enjoy listening to it if you're an economist. So anyways, let's jump right in. It really is my pleasure to be able to speak to the Economics Committee workshop here in Uruguay. Bob, thank you for inviting me. I do appreciate it. I'm going to touch just on a couple of things first, very briefly, because I think I need to set context for myself in talking about trade agreements and trade dynamics. The first one is the OECD Fact Book 2010 reflects some of the work that's been done by the United Nations, been done by World Bank, been done by World Health on world population. And between now and 2050, and I know that I've asked to focus on 2015, 2020 kind of region, but the factors that will get us to 2050 are happening now. So by looking on where we're going to 2050, I think helps set the direction for where we'll be in just 5 or 10 years. We're looking at a 37% increase in world population over the next 40 years. 2.5 billion people are going to increase our population from 6.7 billion to 9.2 billion. And this is the first time I'm going to introduce this concept. The developing world will be responsible for 2.4 billion of that growth. 90%, 95% of that growth will be in the developing world. OECD will only be responsible for 135 million growth during the same period. We'll see a drop of 10 million in the EU. We'll see a drop of 33 million in Japan. And the increases in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States will almost exclusively be through immigration, not through natural or indigenous growth. Taking a look at not only on population dynamics, but looking at the shifts in demographics, and that's the percentage of dependent population. That part of the population that is 15 years of age or younger, or 65 years of age and older. Worldwide, it is expected to increase from just 34.5% to 36%. But the developing world will not change at all. In fact, they will have a small shift, very small shift, of over 65, and a very small shift down for under 15 and under. But in the developed world, we're going to see a 9% increase in dependent population, from 33% to 42%. Canada follows a little less than that overall, primarily because of our very intensive immigration will be continuing to feed our younger population in Canada. But it's even more when you take a look at the aging component of the developed world. The dependent population will increase by 9%, but that part over 65 will increase by 11%. To 26% of the population in the developed world will be 65 or older by 2050. And in fact, 15 and under will decrease by 3%. Finally, completing this, purchasing power and incomes over time. Dr. Hillebrand did a long-term purchasing power scenario just to 2020 and looked at worldwide purchasing power growth of 2.2%, with the developing world at 2.7% and the developed at 2%. But the strongest growth by far is East Asia at 3.8%, with China continuing to power along at 4.2%. So starting to bring it together, looking for the International Food Policy Research Institute, took that same basic synthesis and brought it together to say, what does that mean for meat growth? Because we know that meat consumption overall has to do with the size of the population, has to do with the relative wealth of the population, particularly for developing and transitional economies. But it also has to do with the age and stage of a population. Very clearly, the International Food Policy Research Institute, over the next 50 years, 40 from now, saw that, or estimated that, East Asia and the Pacific would have by far the greatest increase in per capita meat consumption overall, 23 kilos per person to 51, followed by Latin America and Caribbean. And Latin America, in this case, does include Mexico. Central West Africa, an increase, although from a smaller level. And Sub-Saharan Africa, doubling, but from a very low level. So our areas of growth in the world vary distinctly outside of North America. North America and Europe, interestingly enough, is almost all of the growth, only 6 kilos per person increase over time. Almost all of that is in Mexico and Eastern Europe, particularly Russia. So the very well-developed regions economically of North America and Europe are expected not to increase. So on meat consumption, the OECD FAO Agriculture Outlook, they themselves view to 2020 that beef consumption will increase by 9 million tons to 74 million tons worldwide. Developed world will only add 2 million tons to total consumption, while the developing world will add 7 million tons to consumption. So 80% of the next 20 years increase in beef production will take place in the developing world, focused in Asia, Mexico, Russia, and Eastern Europe.
It's okay, Ted, I still got you.
There we go.
No, that's emergency power. There you go.
Probably need to restart the projector.
Yeah.
No, we have a battery.
Oh. We don't like your conclusions, obviously.
I think this is a portent of the World Trade Talks, perhaps.
In the dark?
This is where we were in July of 2008.
You're lucky with a laptop.
Very handy. Very lucky. I got a big laptop at home. For traveling, boy.
Oh, you know.
Does Skype and do all your emails. Create documents.
Maybe this is where you give a speech like
Really?
close your eyes, but let me
But
hear
prompted.
That's right. Let me take you on a journey
My
of
wife
faith.
gave it to me.
As we soar the heights of
Thank you.
Paris, scaling the walls.
And had my big laptop on my little fold-down table, and of course, the chair kind of push the button. You know, 10 fingers got absolutely munched like my laptop. Big heavy laptop, so I said, no.
Can you break the screen or anything?
No.
Excellent. So back at it. That bought me 5 minutes, so I'm over at 11:35. So 80% of the increased level of consumption, according to this work, is in Mexico, Russia, Eastern Europe, as well as Asia. Looking at bringing it together, a synthesis. The developing world will be responsible for primary population growth, primary income growth, primary meat consumption growth, beef import increasing primarily in Europe, Asia, Middle East, Russia, and Latin America over the period. One of the areas that I'm not going to talk about very much in this, but is embedded inside this question, and it's a question I think for us collectively, I think there's a very clear understanding of where the consumption of meat products will be increasing. But there is a raging debate that's happening in the international economics and development field. Where will the production take place? Here we assume the question is, will it happen in the north or the south? Will it happen in North America or will it happen in South America? What role will Australia and New Zealand have in it? But from a development perspective, the small-scale subsistence farmers of Africa and Asia may well have a greater role to play through efficiency gains than any of us imagine at this point. And in fact, there are very large policy questions outstanding today that they should be encouraged to meet almost all of the new consumption growth happening in the developing world. So these are questions that are not for today, but I want to plant them for you anyways. So if we're going to have all of this incredible demand growth over time, and setting aside for a second those that believe most of the growth could or may or even should occur within the developing world itself, my question is, how are we going to facilitate the trade? How are we going to fill the plates? How are we going to bring our products to the mouths of these new consumers? And one of the ways must be through trade reform, either done through a World Trade Organization agreement, whether it's called the Doha Agreement, or whatever it may be resurrected out in the future. And if it isn't going to be done there, then trade reform must be done through an incredibly complex network of free trade agreements or regional trade agreements. And this is really the heart of my presentation. What does this process mean to us, and what are we facing? Well, a quick rehash to go back. In 1994 is when we completed the Uruguay round of the WTO, an implementation after 8 years of negotiations. And it was viewed as largely a successful agreement. Quotas were reduced, tariffs were reduced, quotas I should say were largely eliminated, tariffs were reduced, access was improved. There was no question that the world trading bodies knew that if you're going to take down tariff wall or quota doors, there's going to be other forms of trade management. And so this agreement also put in a sanitary and phytosanitary dispute settlement process, which already we forget did not exist prior to the Uruguay round. There were agreements on maximum distorting trade of domestic subsidies. Overall, it was agreed to be largely successful, although as a legacy, many in the developing world felt that they were not able to fully participate in the trade benefits, particularly the least developed nations, did not feel that they were able to fully participate, primarily because of their technical ability to address these sanitary and phytosanitary barriers. Already by 1996, the first ministerial meeting to create a new round to expand the trade again had taken place in Singapore. Really, Singapore was the beginning of what was later to become the Doha round, but Singapore itself in 1996 actually did create the first agenda. And that was to address government procurement, trade facilitation, which is basic customs clearances, administration of quotas, these kinds of things that actually allow a trade agreement to be implemented so that you don't get stalked through, quite frankly,